started. So why are we here? Our goals today are simple. We want to share the experience that we jointly have gained working with so many clients that are seeking to gain a better control of their M365 environments. At the end of the session, we hope you walk away with an understanding of why governance is more critical now than ever. It's a glimpse of how automation can streamline that governance and boost your user adoption, which is where we come in. And in the wake of AI tools like Copilot entering the environment, you see why this is essential when you're scaling your Copilot rollout plans. Here's our agenda for today. So we'll make some introductions. As I mentioned, it'll be about 30 minutes of presentation time, followed by 15-minute Q&A. We will share some real data, obviously without names from an existing client, so you can see that you're not alone. And then we'll talk a little bit how Peter will show us how governance automation can help, and we'll leave you with some tips you can action now. So our speakers today are myself. I'm Deanna Button. I'm a senior M365 consultant at Change Champions. Joining me are Agustin Del Vento. He's the CEO of Change Champions. And Peter Badley, who is the Director of GTM Sales and Client Solutions at SnapOn Software. Agustin, I'll hand it over to you to talk a little bit about Change Champions and what we do.
Yes, thank you, folks. And some of you know us, obviously. Some of you may not. It's a pleasure to be here with everyone. We are technology and change management experts. Our company really has evolved from focusing mostly on user adoption and change management into more of the technical space, I would say. And so we've helped organizations build collaboration portals, intranets, governance assessments. We work on live and on-demand training. We have a particular expertise in cybersecurity awareness. We've done projects where we've migrated data to the cloud and such. So it's a real pleasure to be speaking to you. And we, as Diana pointed out earlier, we are bringing experience from, having worked with clients. So what you'll see here is real life stuff. And not fluff. It really is stuff that we want you to think about as you're rolling out Copilot. And of course, we're Microsoft partners and experts, so we live and breathe this technology. So we've really been close to it enough to understand what end users suffer with and IT teams should be careful about.
Great. Peter, do you want to tell us a little bit about SnapOn?
Yes, thank you. And thank you for everyone attending and for the opportunity to speak today. So SnapOn Software is a relatively new brand. It was launched a few months ago. It's a bringing together of several different product brands, some of which you may have heard of before. So Quiz or QuizCom, which makes collaboration products for Microsoft 365. Provision Point, which we're going to be showcasing today, which is a compliance and governance solution for Microsoft 365. And also the SST products under App Efficiency. We make products for the Microsoft and NetSuite space, and we support and enhance those products and then support a range of customers worldwide. Hopefully I'll have the opportunity to share some examples of our product today, Provision Point, and share some real life examples as well.
Certainly been a great. Oh, sorry.
Go ahead. No, you go ahead.
No, I was going to say it's been great to come together and share some of the stories that we've all encountered.
Yes, and we sincerely appreciate, Peter, you giving us your time. We know you're busy and you're in the UK, so it's 9 hours ahead. So thanks so much for doing this over dinner. With that said, we want to talk to you about why governance matters for your Copilot rollouts. I think most of us understand this at a high level, but we brought some examples and want to kind of reflect with you about this. So we feel that there's, in essence, two things that we should be looking at as you're planning your Copilot rollout. We know that giving access to Copilot to someone is very easy. All you're doing essentially is giving a license, right? But without a little bit of a close look at your environment, this may be risky. Why? Because from our experience, we see clients are not realizing that when they're giving Copilot to their users, there is a risk of oversharing. So in other words, Copilot draws content from cloud repositories like SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, or even Outlook. And without proper governance, what may happen is that users may be sharing things with others, and then Copilot will be crawling through that information and then exposing it to other people. It's like in the old days of Delve, very much the same, but this time with AI, powered by AI, right? So even more so. And I'll show an example of that we performed just before this session. The other issue that we see is that Copilot obviously performs best when it's accessing well-structured, relevant, and up-to-date data. And I think we can all agree is that if we look at our environments, SharePoint environments, there's a lot of data that may not be great, right? So with bad data, poor results, and then users move from excitement to disappointment quickly, right? So what we want to talk to you about today is how you can apply some governance into your tenant to, in a way, damper these issues. Now, I'll jump into the next slide. I want to show you a real case here with we did with Diana before this session. So this is a good example of oversharing in Copilot. So I asked Diana to share a file with me, a file that she stored in her OneDrive. Okay, as you may recall, OneDrive is your personal file storage. So they're not meant to be shared with the entire org. Files from there. Yet our users do that often. So she shared this file called Finance Division Budget Tracker with me. She basically shared the link with me and using OneDrive and Outlook. And then I went ahead in step number 2 and I asked Copilot for the data about this topic. So I said, could you share the budget for the finance division? And so Copilot responded, and sure enough, Copilot shared her file as the most relevant and structured data that it could find, right? So what's the issue here? The issue is that the budget file could have been accidentally shared with me. For example, Diana could have shared that with a colleague of hers, in the organization, and then that colleague could have shared this with someone else, right? And so we don't know where those links that we're sharing end up, right? And especially depending on your governance, right? If you've been a bit lax with your sharing permissions, that could be a really simple problem. So I have a powerful engine to find data that amplifies the oversharing problem, in other words, right? So users need to be careful about how they share information with others, and especially if they're sharing with people in their organization, not realizing that these people can share with others and so on. So this, I thought, was a good sort of example that kind of paints the picture of this problem of oversharing. And as you may have heard, Microsoft is actually quite a bit aware of these risks of oversharing and poor content quality. And to address these issues, they have recently released capabilities to control who has access to what and to audit your environment. So as you can see in this slide, and we can share the deck afterwards. For example, Microsoft has introduced capabilities such as the ability to restrict access to specific SharePoint sites in your environment, or to do content discoveries where you can see reports of who has access to what, and so on. We believe that while these measures are effective, the root cause of the problem, which is really a messy environment and the lack of governance, is not really being addressed, right? And this is why this topic is so relevant today.
When we say governance, we mean a framework that highlights the rules and the guardrails that you want to put in for using technology. Comes with a lot of decisions, sometimes some conversation. But to illustrate what we mean by governance, we like to use analogies. So imagine your organization is paddling a canoe down the river. The business teams are focused on speed and direction. They want to get to their destination quickly and efficiently. They want productivity and they want user experience, good user experience. And the IT teams are, as rightly so, more focused on stability and safety. They want to make sure that that canoe doesn't capsize or hit the rocks or drift off course. They're looking at security and compliance. And as a joke, legal likes to put us in a submarine. But in this case, in the analogy of a canoe, governance is the rudder. It doesn't slow the canoe down like an anchor, it guides it. It helps steer users in the right direction, and it helps balance the need to move fast with the need to stay safe. If your rudder's too rigid, the canoe becomes hard to steer and progress slows, which nobody wants. And if there's no rudder at all, the canoe might go fast, but it could crash or get lost. And as a former dragon boater, I can definitely remember those times when that rudder was off course.
Yeah, and yes, and great analogy, right? I feel like these examples, folks, will give you a good sort of illustration of what we're talking about when we say collaboration governance. Here are some of the decisions you may want to keep in mind as you're preparing for your Copilot rollout. And there's many more, by the way. These are not exhaustive. I mean, when you think about Copilot agents, for example, there's questions about that. But these would be some of the basic ones that we want to talk to you about today. For example, provisioning. When you talk about provisioning, how are you controlling who has access to create things? What should those SharePoint sites or Teams workspaces should look like? Should they have a naming convention, right? Should you involve a person in setting these up, or should you automate this, maybe to make it a bit easier and more consistent? In terms of management, should you enable private channels, shared channels? How should you explain to users what to use when? What features should you have? In terms of lifecycle, should you make things expire? What is your archival strategy, right? What about retention and how you're going to monitor the health of your environment, if you will? With security, guests and sharing links are very important. We see that over and over again. But also things like retention labels and purview. And with user adoption, training. So, for example, we have a client recently rolled out Copilot and made it a requirement for everyone to go through a training so that they would get access to the platform, right? So maybe there's a requirement that you put in place to make sure that users are doing the right thing as they're using these tools.
And it's that fine balance between business and governance decisions. Here's an example of a client of ours that came for governance support as they recognized that they needed to put on the brakes and create some governance definitions. So this client in particular has almost 2,000 SharePoint sites and about 2,500 users. And they only have about a fraction of the 2 million files stored in those sites that were active. So if you're doing the math, that's almost a single SharePoint site for every user. They had the same situation in Teams. They have more than 600 teams, only a third of them are active. The client also had allowed the users to create public teams, public being available to join by anyone in the organization. There was private channels, shared channels. It was contributing to the very messy environment. And if you're wondering what the overall problem is here, it boils down to the bottom line, which is cost. So storage in the world of the cloud costs money, especially if you go over your allotted amount. Our clients have been quoted upwards of $3,600 per terabyte per year in additional storage costs. In the case of this client, they're looking at a cost that is growing by $10,000 a year each month. And that need for storage is only increasing as they continue to move more files to the cloud without an expiration policy. Everything lives forever, which you'd often think is what the users want, but what it creates is an environment where they can't find anything and they aren't sure if things are relevant.
Another example that we've seen, and I encourage you to look at your tenant and what you're doing, but this client did not realize that they had chosen the most permissive setting for their guest invitations to the tenant. So this setting allowed not only people to invite guests, but guests to invite guests, right? So this could mean that anyone could be added to the tenant with and access the data. And as a result, many guests also ended up being inactive, which nobody's looking at and maybe requires a bit of a cleanup. In regards to sharing, you can see there too that the organization had also the most permissive settings, with anyone with a link could access data. This could potentially expose information, not just internally, like I said, people could access that link and others can access the link of the person sharing, but also externally, because now you're sharing with others as well. And again, sometimes I think users don't realize that. They also did not apply any sensitivity labels at all. So there was no automatic tagging or flagging the risks. And so without this proper labeling, the data was really just very much exposed.
And we did send a survey out to users at this organization, and we received feedback that we couldn't address through training alone. A lot of the legitimate questions that our users had were the result of the absence of some of these governance decisions. And this is not a blame game. We know everyone is often in the same spot, trying to balance those needs. But the questions we got were, I'm a new starter. Why should I use SharePoint instead of Teams? What's the difference? And how can I collaborate with people outside my organization without risk? How can I do it safely? Everyone's doing this differently. What is the archiving strategy? In working with clients, we often see these issues running into three themes. These ones rising to the top when there isn't a collaboration governance plan in place. The first being user experience, which I've already given you some examples of. There's confusion and inconsistency. Users are frustrated, and sometimes that causes them to go create more risk by going outside of their approved tools and using shadow IT. Risk is created where there is oversharing of information, as Augustine talked about, a lack of policies for external sharing and guest access. It creates sprawl and storage issues. And as we talked about earlier, increased costs. And these are costs that are not often budgeted for. This is unexpected costs for the organization due to that site sprawl and digital clutter. So what you want your governance approach to do is to help. You want it to help control sprawl, your teams, your groups, your sites. You want it to protect data, sensitive information, compliance, external sharing. You want to enable users without locking everything down. And you want to save on resources by automating where possible. Lifecycle, how long something lives, naming, approvals. But who has the time to have the conversation and to implement that plan? This is where we believe Provision Point by SnapOn software can help, because it can automate a lot of that collaboration governance and give you back some control over your tenant. I'm going to pass it on to Peter now to walk us through a bit of a demo on how they do that.
Thank you. Yeah, I love a couple of the insights there. The one on Delve, I use that one myself. I think for those who remember Delve and the panic around Delve and surfacing things through search, AI is just 10 times worse because it's bigger and so many more people are interested in it. And I think the other one was the number of teams in organizations. I've been spoken to organizations where they have more teams than users, which is slightly amazing. I'm going to pick up on the three things which Deanna just talked about. So we'll look at Provision Point and how it can help in a number of areas, but we're going to focus into these areas specifically today. So user experience, we'll look at using provisioning templates to allow users to self-serve the creation of workspaces. And this is more than just a log a ticket and someone in IT goes and creates it for you. This is end-to-end provisioning and controlling all of those key aspects around security and compliance and labeling. Secondly, we'll look at security risks, and we'll look at how we can apply and control things like sensitivity labels from Purview, and also use some of the auditing capabilities to look at those risks around sharing links from both SharePoint and OneDrive. And then finally, we'll look at some of the policy capabilities to tackle sprawl, tackle ongoing risk with things like unused teams, orphan teams as well. So I'm going to take over sharing so I can share my screen. And I'm just asking Augustine or Deanna just to confirm that they can see my screen. That's good. Right, fantastic. So I'll start off by talking about the user experience and the provisioning. So I'm going to use 2 users today. And for my initial part of my demonstration, I'm going to use Adele. So she represents an end user. And instead of being confused with lots of choices in Teams, we'll actually make it very easy for her. She can access the Provision Point application in several different ways. You can access it here in the new app page, which is aligned to Copilot, and it will open it here. We can also make it available to users inside of Microsoft Teams. It's a regular Microsoft Teams app, and you can enforce your policies around it. Instead of having to go and raise a ticket or try and configure the team herself, we actually make a number of predefined templates available to her. You can configure those templates in your instance of Provision Point, select the ones which are relevant to you, and also control which templates are available to which users. The nice thing here is we can have different controls around different templates. So for example, here, if I go and select a team, which is for use for a department, you'll notice that I'm immediately controlling how that team is shared, and also how that team is labeled. So going on to the next phase of our discussion around putting those additional controls in from an auditing perspective, I can do things like control sensitivity labels here. I can also control whether my team is private or public and whether those sharing settings are enabled. Some of you may know, others may not do, that in Microsoft 365, you have to set the maximum level of sharing, which you're going to allow in your tenant. But then you have to consciously, as an administrator, reduce that sharing in certain scenarios. Provision Point lets you control that on a template by template basis. If I select a different template, which is for external use, I've got different sensitivity controls, a different level of security controls, but I might have a different authorization process for that template. So I'm going to go here and I'm going to request this template. I'm going to say what the name of my team is going to be, and it's going to ask me to provide some additional metadata. This is really important because it allows us to understand how the team is going to be used. It allows us to name the team correctly so that users can understand it. It also allows us to do and look at things like usage scenarios and other things like that if a certain team is requesting a lot of teams, for example. I'm going to go and select from my organizational metadata. This is entirely configurable. And you'll notice as I go through here that this project code in my example is going to control the name of the team. This is something I really want to call out. One of the big challenges organizations have is with orphan teams, and that often leads to that third area of sprawl. So people don't manage their teams because they leave the organization and there's only one person who was originally the owner of that. We can enforce these policies from the start and make sure we've always got 2 owners, and then continue to monitor that during the life cycle of the team. We can apply an expiry policy. And here's a really nice element as well. If, for instance, we're sharing the team externally or any other type of policy enforcement, you can ask the owners before they request the team to confirm they accept relevant policies. I'm going to go ahead and request my new team. And I use the word request because dependent on the template you're using, you can define whether an approval process is required. So because my team is going to be externally shared in the policies which I've implemented in this instance of Provision Point, approval is needed. So if I switch over to another user here, Megan, she's my approver, and she'll receive an approval notification a bit like this. It's customizable. It can be an email. We're also going to be making these notifications shortly available in Teams as well. And she'll also be notified within the Provision Point app. She gets assigned a task. Now, Megan could be Adele's manager. She could be the department which is responsible for this team. She could be in security and needs to verify it, or a combination of those because we want different security rules in place. So we can still have those guardrails of our organization without, but still empowering that sort of governed self-service. So I'm going to go in and action this request. I can review it. I can give feedback. I can approve or reject it. I'm going to go here and approve it. Now, the key thing and the key element of how this works really well, and I'm not going to do a deep dive into the configuration here. This team is now going to start creating, and it's going to apply our settings. And as an administrator, I can actually go and define the different settings around the team which gets created. So I can define things like, well, actually, do we allow shared channels? Do we allow private channels as part of the configuration? Do we have a predefined setup for how we do projects so people have a setup which they're familiar with? Does that include a planner plan? Does that include certain lists and libraries with predefined folder structures? We can even go and define how we want our structure to be made available for users to use. We can go in and define things like, do we use labels from Purview to control the retention of files, the sensitivity of files? So ensure that our policies are correctly applied from the start rather than a retrospective scenario when it's already been created. We can also go in and control how our team is named with a naming formula. In this case, my project code is going to be set as a name for my team. That means my team is going to be standard in the way it's named. So for example, here, if I return to my team, you see my team is set up there with the channels I've defined, the naming convention I've defined, and it will also define other aspects of the privacy and the security. So for example, let me just refresh the screen. I'll show you the setup of my team, and I can control a number of different policies around that team. I'll switch to my other screen because that's running a little bit slowly. So we can control our teams, not just from the provisioning point of view, but also from the policy perspective. So for example, we can control the expiry, which lets us manage that sprawl effectively. And then we can control it with ongoing checks, or what we call compliance policies. So a lifecycle policy controls the expiry. It says what happens when my team is going to expire. It can manage multiple stages. And our compliance policy runs, and I'll zoom in on this screen because it's a little bit small writing on my big monitor. It can control that we monitor and check for risks associated with our team. So for example, this one checks to say, are any of the teams inactive? Have they been modified within a certain period of time? Have they been accessed within a certain period of time? That can trigger our lifecycle process. We can look for things like oversharing. Are there inactive guest users? Are there teams which are configured where we've got the most permissive sharing settings on? And that's not what we look for in an organization. And can we look for orphan teams? So teams where there are at least one inactive owner, and we want to replace those inactive owners. What do all those policies look like? Well, firstly, on an individual site or team basis, we can go and see how they're being applied. So for example, if I go and look at one of these older teams, which has been in my organization a little bit longer, we can go and see what's happening. We can see that this is going to expire soon. It's going to trigger my lifecycle process. I can see the different stages of compliance checks. So I actually can see that it's not orphaned, but actually we've got some risks associated with it not being actively used, and oversharing is potentially a risk. We can look at where it's at in its life cycle journey, so the stages it's going to follow within its life cycle as well. So in this case, it's going to move to archiving and then deletion. But we can give the opportunity for team owners to intervene and say, I'm still using that. So an individual team, from an owner's perspective, I get a great view, but also from an administrator's perspective, I can view a number of these compliance reports and understand where that risk exists. So for example, here, anything gray, there's potentially a risk. So for example, here I can go and look at my workspace usage and say, Well, actually, only one of my teams is actively being used. 4 of them are inactive. I can drill in and understand why. I can export that data, or I can go and have a look at a specific team and understand what's going on. And I can see there haven't been any accesses within the last 30 days. So my team is potentially inactive. To give you another example, let's look at one where it looks at some orphaned workspaces. So here, perhaps on my next screen, because I've got quite regular runs of my policies. So here we go, here. So here I can see that one of my teams is non-compliant. This is because it's looking for owners which are no longer active. This one's our risk. Again, we can export it, but we can also drill into a little bit of detail. We can see that Nestor's not an active owner. Now, in my environment, I'm just providing reports to administrators, but we can be much more proactive than that. We can go ahead and archive an inactive team. We can go ahead and remove a disabled owner, replace them with someone else. We can reduce the amount of sharing. We can remove inactive guest users directly from our team. So Provision Point can automate that cleanup and manage some of those ongoing risks. Finally, we talked a lot earlier on about sharing links, and that being one of the biggest challenges around adopting Copilot, because it creates that broken permission model and considers files which perhaps you shouldn't really have access to. Our audit capability allows us to audit across Microsoft Teams, SharePoint, and OneDrive. And we can look at things like guest users, sharing links, drill into storage and understand our teams which are using a significant amount of storage. My particular favorite one, we can do much more drilled down reports on individual teams or OneDrive, but I like to just run a report across my tenant. And anyone who's tried to run a report or understand where files are shared across their environment realize that this sort of report can take hours or days to run in an environment, because you've got to try and untangle all of that mix of sharing links. Actually, our auditing capability for sharing links, guest users, storage, orphaned users can be run across our whole environment in a matter of seconds or a minute. And we can see where there are sharing links, the location of it. Is it OneDrive? Is it Teams? Who did the sharing? Who's it shared with? Is it externally accessible? We can export those reports. As an administrator, we can go and remove those sharing links, or we can even delegate it back to our team and OneDrive owners and say, you run these reports yourself, and be proactive around what you should clean up. So we put the tools in both at the owners and the administrators and compliance managers' hands, whether that be through provisioning templates, audit reports like this, or policies to manage compliance and expiry of unused teams. You can deploy Provision Point to your environment now, and policies and reports can be run against your existing environment, and then you can work and build out a stronger provisioning process moving forward. But I'll hand it back because I know we want to talk about next actions to wrap up today.
Thank you, Peter. It's flashing back to having created governance business rules and then trying to communicate things like naming conventions and just hoping that my users would abide by them. It's great to have a tool that actually just puts that into place. Skip ahead here a moment. Apologies, this is just loading slower. There we go. So this might be a counterintuitive message coming from a group of user adoption experts, but we want to say, don't jump in directly to training your users. We've often been brought in where the idea is people need to be trained. And like we found in that one survey, that people are confused. So training them and continuing the confusion isn't actually what you need. You need to have time to think about these things. So before rolling out your Copilot, before rolling out Copilot, chat or the licensed version, and even if you're already in the midst of this, take a moment, review your governance plan, ask your organization some of those basic governance questions. We will have a resource that we're going to share after the session, so you'll receive that by email to help have those questions and conversations. You have the options to implement a tool to automate that governance in your audit, and Provision Point is one such tool, as you've seen today. You want to audit your collaboration environment against those governance decisions. So perhaps your governance, which, as it has for me, lived in a policy document somewhere. Was that actually what's happening in your environment today? Have a look and see where those pain points are rising to the surface. And you want to create a technology and a people plan to address your issues. You can't do this with technology alone, and you need to bring your people along the journey, because it is, like we said, it's a fine balance between those business needs and keeping your environment compliant and secure. So with those tips, we hope that now you can go off, and then once you've gotten through those steps, now you can go off and promote and train your users in Copilot and Microsoft 365, but with confidence. So realize that's not a quick process. It could be something that, like I said, you're doing in parallel with your Copilot rollout. But if you've already started, we want to say it's not too late. Peter, did you want to add anything to that, or Augustine?
My main point there is that does seem like a lot of things, but what's the risk of not doing it properly? We talked about the cost around things like storage, but the cost of people surfacing data in Copilot, which is incorrect. What's the cost to you of someone using the wrong pricing information, because that's what Copilot had access to last year's pricing information, for example, or providing a customer with installation instructions when they're using out-of-date information which hasn't been archived correctly. So getting it right is really important.
Thanks, Peter.
From my point of view, I look at this as governance. I like to think of it as governance by design, in the sense of when you're presenting your tools to your users using an automation tool like Peter's demo today. You're not forcing them to think what to use Teams for, or how to use SharePoint, whether they can do external sharing or not. You're basically presenting out of the gate an option that determines all of that for them, right? So I think that has a lot of value. And then in terms of the why implement a tool like Provision Point before you audit, is because if you try to do all this audit on your own, pulling, PowerShell scripts and all kinds of things, it'll take you way longer than just doing maybe a POC, a tool like this that will just surface all the issues right away, right? So we thought these steps would be the less painful and fast.
And easier on your IT department than having to pull multiple reports.